The Boruto time skip is officially here and is starting out with a clash between the series protagonist and the series secondary antagonist. And man, it's crazy to think that the guy who's stronger than an alien that forced Kurama to sacrifice himself in order to stop him, and has an army of thousands of mini Ten-Tails at his disposal, is only the secondary antagonist of the series. But despite how much of a threat he is to the overall shinobi world, the Kawaki still remains the main threat to Boruto himself. Well, I mean, at least for now anyway, because despite how far he's gone to make sure he can achieve his goal of unaliving his brother, I still think that Boruto has a chance of saving Kawaki. Because getting into his role in this chapter, Kawaki is still seemingly a good person at heart. I mean, yeah, sure, he kidnapped Naruto and Hinata and trapped them in a prison dimension, turned Konoha and possibly the entire shinobi world against Boruto, and essentially orphaned Himawari. But all that being said, even after everything he's done, he's still doing what he can to protect the village and its civilians, because he could have easily decided to dedicate himself to solely hunting down Boruto, or at the very least training his karma mark to completely master it, so that when Boruto eventually popped back up in the village, he could easily kill him. But instead, he's seemingly been spending his time hunting down Code's claw marks to make sure that he can make his way back into the village. And there is literally nothing that's forcing Kawaki to do this, or to make him work closely with Shikamaru, considering how the entire world believes that he is actually Naruto's biological son, and that the person he considered a brother more than likely betrayed the village and killed his father. No one would have batted an eye or even questioned if he decided to give up on everything else besides getting revenge. I mean, of course, characters like Shikamaru or Konohamaru would have tried to convince him to help out because he is now the strongest person in Konoha, but again, there's nothing that they could have done to force him to help out. He's doing this out of his own free will, which to me indicates that there is still some good in Kawaki's heart, and if Boruto is anything like his dad, then he should be able to talk Nojutsu Kawaki back onto his side, after they do a little bit of the kicking and punching and maybe take each other's arms off. But still, eventually, by the end of their fight, they should be back to being brothers and working together to possibly stop Code once he gets elevated back to being the main series villain. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the story will eventually play out this way. The only thing that's still kind of left up in the air is how they'll end up turning things back to normal, which we see that Sarada has apparently spent the last 3 years trying to do, as the first thing we see in this chapter is her yelling at Shikamaru, trying to convince him that Boruto is innocent. Probably not the best way to convince the new Hokage to be on your side, but she is Sasuke's kid, and obviously she inherited his, let's call it, persuasiveness, or lack thereof. Anyway, obviously it doesn't end up working. He's still convinced that Boruto is a traitor to the village and that Kawaki is Naruto's actual son. And we find out later from Ada that because the Shinjutsu has been active for so long, that it's going to be nearly impossible to persuade anyone that the opposite is true. And that scene made me think at first that this was confirming that until the Shinjutsu is lifted, no one besides Sarada, Sumeri, and Sasuke would believe that Boruto is innocent. Which, by the way, we end up finding out that apparently Sarada and Sumeri are still pretending to be under Ada's charm like everyone else. At first, I thought there really wasn't a point at this point for them to pretend to be under the charm, they could just reveal it to her. But then I remembered, as the chapter reminded us actually, that the second Damon finds out that they're not affected by the charm, he's going to instantly try to kill them. So, yeah, it does make sense for them to still pretend to be under its effect. Although, I got the feeling from this chapter that Ada knows they're faking it, but just hasn't figured out exactly how yet. But getting back to the Shinjutsu, I do think that even though the chapter tells us that it will be impossible to convince others that Boruto is actually Naruto's son, it also hints at the same time at the possibility of other characters like Sasuke in the future being convinced that he is. As we see later on after a training session between Himawari and Chocho, that Himawari doesn't feel that everything they think about Boruto is actually correct, leaving the possibility that maybe if presented with enough evidence like Sasuke, and maybe even after talking with Boruto himself, she could realize what's going on. Anyway, then we head on to the end of the chapter, where while hunting down Code's claw marks, Kawaki finds one on the back of one of the village ninja. He tells Shikamaru about it and tells him to gather all the village ninja that are assigned of hunting down the claw marks in order to check them and make sure he gets rid of all the claw marks that might be on top of them. But before he can, Code sends some mini Ten-Tails through the claw marks on other ninja in order to invade Konoha, and eventually comes through himself in order to face off against Sarada, who he plans on using in order to lure Boruto, who apparently he's been hunting down for the past 2 years, to come back to the village by, you know, killing her. But before he can, Boruto pops in out of thin air, standing right on Code's face, and the chapter ends with everyone being alerted to Boruto being back in the village. So yeah, there we go. The title character has the least amount of screen time in the first chapter back since the time skip, but his entrance was just simply incredible. And his post-time skip design, in my opinion, is actually pretty dope. In fact, I actually dug all of the new designs we saw in this chapter for the main younger cast. My favorite was probably Sumeri's. I just love something about that simple design she has, especially that necktie. I don't know why, it's just doing it for me. And my least favorite might have been Shikadai's, only because he really didn't change much in appearance. That being said, his design, in my opinion, is tied with Kawaki's, just because I'm really not digging Kawaki's all that much. Though it is exactly what I imagine a 15-year-old whose whole personality is being an edgelord would grow to look like after 3 years. Also, I knew coming out of the time skip that Ada's design would be relatively the same because she was already 16 prior to chapter 80, and since we figured that the time skip would be around the same as Naruto's, which was around 2 to 3 years, which we were right, it was a 3-year time skip, she wouldn't have changed that much because she'd only be growing to be 19 years old at this point. So I figured she might be just a little bit taller, maybe have a new hairstyle, new clothes, but that'd be about it. But the fact that Damon hasn't changed seemingly at all is extremely surprising. Now that being said, because he is laying on Ada's lap in the one and only scene that we see him in, it's hard to say for sure if he hasn't at least gotten a little bit taller, maybe the same size as Himawari now. But just looking at him from this chapter, it really doesn't seem like he's changed at all. And I guess this is confirming that since the two of them are technically cyborgs, that they age at a much slower rate than normal humans would. Anyway, that is it for my review of Boruto Blue Vortex Chapter 1 / Boruto Chapter 81. Based on how this first chapter started, I'm honestly excited to see where this is all going. I mean, we know eventually it's going to all lead to the battle between Boruto and Kawaki, but even what just happens in the very next chapter has me on the edge of my seat, and I cannot wait to see it. Also, I didn't mention it in my review, but the leading theory that the fandom seems to have is that Sasuke is already dead, which, if that is true, I'm looking forward to finding out exactly how that happened and seeing how Sarada reacts to that. But in order to find out whether or not Sasuke truly is dead and to see how everyone reacts to that news, we'll have to wait to see what's coming next in Chapter 2.